A former soldier wakes up with the ability to know everything that will happen in the near future. He knows about the enemy's arrival, anticipates attacks, and is able to deflect them. He even knows when a larger assault is coming and the precise moment to jump out of his apartment. Beyond just knowing about the enemy's movements, the former soldier is also aware of the cry of a distressed man whose sports car is being hijacked. There are other enemies who come to attack him, this time two women with heavy weaponry named Pam and Esmeralda. These fierce women relentlessly chase the man, but so far everything is still under control until he gets hit by a bus. Yes, the former soldier named Roy doesn't fully understand, but one thing is certain. Every morning at 7 a.m., Roy wakes up to repeat the same day, and this has happened hundreds of times, each time Roy dies. There are only minor changes that occur with each repetition, depending on what Roy does. Of course, besides Mr. Good Morning, who always appears when he wakes up, there are the helicopter, Pam, and Esmeralda, along with other assassins like Guan Yin, who almost always manages to kill Roy with a sword, Kaboom, who cunningly plants a bomb, Smiley with his harpoon or spear, the German twins, and a man who looks very much like Roy, whom Roy usually refers to as Number 2. Sometimes Roy manages to evade or eliminate some of them, but every time that happens, another assassin appears to finish off Roy. Roy always believes that his ex-wife is the only person who can explain what is really happening. Unfortunately, she is nowhere to be found, and there is no response when Roy tries to contact her. In several instances, the one who answers the phone is his ex-wife's superior, Colonel Clive Ventor. The man explains that Roy's ex-wife, named Gemma, died in an accident, but Roy doesn't believe it and is convinced that Ventor is hiding something. Unfortunately, Roy never lives long enough to find out more. On one occasion, after successfully avoiding the bus and escaping the pursuit of Pam and Esmeralda, Roy heads to a cafe owned by Jack. He must quickly sit at the bar, or else the spot will be taken by a woman named Dai Feng, a world martial arts champion whom Jack fancies. While drinking, Roy listens to the ramblings of a man named Dave sitting next to him. Dave keeps talking about internal security and conspiracy theories. Then, at 12:47, this is the most difficult moment for Roy to get through, as an assassin always finds and kills him. Of course, you might be wondering what happens if he doesn't go to the cafe. The result is that Roy dies even earlier, indicating that Roy has tried several alternative ways. It is shown that before all this chaos began, Roy visited Gemma at her workplace, specifically at a research facility owned by Dino, after receiving a message stating that Dino was in need of employees. However, Gemma herself wasn't too interested in his resume, let alone reuniting after such a long time apart. The woman was busy measuring Roy's body and taking samples, while Ventor and his aide Brett watched suspiciously through cameras. Roy and Gemma then discussed the strange machine in front of them, which, according to Gemma, could cause the end of the world. In the conversation, Roy casually asked about their son, Joe. It turned out that the boy didn't recognize his father at all. Joe only knew Roy as a distant relative. Roy could accept Gemma's decision to keep Joe away because Roy was very busy with his military duties at the time, but even so, Roy still hoped to have a chance to be part of Joe's life. Before they could argue, Brett came in and interrupted, reminding Gemma that they were in a restricted area, but Gemma quickly refuted this, stating that she had a special agreement with Ventor. When Roy tried to hand over his resume, he was outright rejected. Brett stated that the company never accepted new employees, which simultaneously exposed Gemma's lie. However, Gemma immediately asked Brett to leave before he could worsen the situation. Before parting, Gemma explained about a very important birthday gift that needed to be opened, and then she whispered the word Osiris to Roy several times, hoping he would remember it. Ventor was not pleased to see Roy at the facility, especially knowing about the experiment. Therefore, he immediately ordered Brett to hire several assassins to kill Roy and asked Gemma to come to his office. At this moment, Ventor shared an experience with a profound meaning related to trust, confidentiality, and security, and he emphasized to Gemma not to invite anyone to the facility. Meanwhile, it shows Roy, who sometime later is at a bar, having fun with a woman named Alice who claims to be a dentist. It is known that Roy often changes partners, and this draws the attention of the bartender, who notices that not a single woman makes Roy happy or is able to erase his sadness. Suddenly, he receives a phone call from Gemma, who says something unclear and confusing, asking Roy to be strong and do something right, then abruptly hangs up. Roy feels something strange and is briefly worried, but that feeling quickly fades as he becomes heavily intoxicated. Gemma herself continues her work using Roy's samples. Ventor sees this through the surveillance cameras and immediately sends Brett to approach her. This was the last moment in Roy's normal life before the time loop began. After recalling the conversation with his ex, Roy realizes that he hasn't opened his birthday gift. So in the next loop, Roy immediately opens it after sorting out a few issues. It turns out the gift is a book titled Iset and Osiris, with a few lines of messages implying that time will not wait. Being too focused on the book makes Roy let his guard down, allowing the assassin to easily kill him. Then, after being killed twice on the next occasion, Roy runs away with the book and discovers a button he hadn't noticed before, which makes the car speed up, causing him to pass Jack's cafe and arrive somewhere else that seems safe enough to continue reading. A while later, Roy still doesn't understand the story and the message in the book when he suddenly sees Joe making a transaction. Roy thinks if Gemma has indeed died, then he is Joe's only family. Roy immediately follows until he arrives at an arcade game center where they are holding a tournament. Roy then approaches Joe and scolds him for skipping school. From the conversation, it is revealed that what Joe bought are items related to the game, not something illegal. Then, Roy invites Joe to lunch, and at this moment, Roy realizes that it is now 12:50 p.m., the longest time since the loop started. Another thing Roy realizes is about a tracker or bug that might have been placed on him at Jack's cafe or elsewhere. Unfortunately, once again, this makes Roy too focused and unprepared for the arrival of the assassins, just when Roy was about to admit himself as Joe's father. In the next loop, instead of eliminating Mr. Good Morning, Roy interrogates him, asking about the location of the tracker, but Mr. Good Morning refuses to disclose anything. In the following attempt, after overcoming various obstacles, Roy decides to go to Jack's cafe, specifically to the restroom, to check his entire body. However, he fails to find the tracker he is looking for. Remembering that Dave might know a lot about this, Roy immediately goes to him to discuss the matter. Dave suggests that Roy should check his teeth, which reminds him of Alice, the dentist, and what she might have done while Roy was heavily intoxicated. Brett was also present, watching during that time. After daringly pulling out a few teeth, Roy finally finds the tracker in one of them. However, number 2 suddenly appears and quickly kills Roy. In the next loop, Roy doesn't let Alice escape and interrogates her. At this moment, it is revealed that Brett paid Alice to plant the tracker on Roy. After overcoming several obstacles like before, Roy promptly pulls out the correct tooth to remove the tracker. Instead of destroying the device, he takes it to an old building to lure Pam. The plan works, but Pam refuses to reveal who paid her, so for his own safety, Roy kills Pam with a pistol claimed to have belonged to a high-ranking Nazi figure. Roy realizes that Gemma intentionally involved him, and that there must be a reason. Unfortunately, Roy doesn't get an explanation, as he doesn't have enough time to save his ex-wife. The only thing he can do is seek revenge, so Roy begins to have fun by using the tracker to deceive the assassins and eliminate them all. Using Kaboom's phone, Roy contacts and vows to kill Brett and Venter. A short time later, Roy is seen on his way to the facility. Unfortunately, when he tries to break in, he crashes and is then killed by Brett. A series of loops ensue, with Roy continuously trying different methods to sneak into the Dino facility, such as driving his car through the fence, disguising himself as number 2, and carrying weapons to incapacitate the guards, all to no avail. Eventually, Roy disguises himself as a security officer, which allows him to easily infiltrate the facility and confront Guan Yin, the sword-wielding woman who is very difficult to defeat due to her incredible speed. On one occasion, Roy finally manages to survive a little longer, which makes a difference. Ventor arrives and talks about his plan to eliminate Roy. At this moment, Roy learns about a secret project called the Osiris Spindle. Roy realizes two things. First, Venter does not know that the project was successful and truly works. And second, Gemma intentionally used it on Roy so he could become like Osiris to stop Venter. This is a revelation that excites Roy as he regains Gemma's trust. Roy begins a series of loops with a new plan. After overcoming several obstacles, Roy immediately heads to Jack's cafe to meet Dai Feng and pleads with her to share some of her martial arts knowledge. Because Dai Feng's time is very limited, Roy is forced to undergo time loops until he becomes skilled enough to defeat her. After thanking her, Roy quickly sneaks back into the dino facility in the same way until he meets Guan Yin and starts a sword duel, which this time, of course, will not have the same outcome. Shortly after, Brett arrives with Ventor, and Brett is quickly eliminated, as he is not important. The fight with Ventor then begins, and with his kung fu skills, it is not difficult for Roy to defeat Venter. Roy tells Venter that he should not play God and alter history, as the past is not meant to be fixed, but rather to serve as a meaningful lesson. Venter mentions Roy's absence as a father figure, which angers Roy and reminds him of Joe. After eliminating Venter, Roy rushes to his car and heads to the mall, where he knows it's already too late because Joe has died. Without realizing it, this has happened repeatedly during the time loops. After taking down several guards, Roy finally manages to get close enough to see Joe. Suddenly, a very bright light appears, signaling the end of the world, as Gemma mentioned about the consequences of the Osiris spindle. In the next loop, Roy concludes that Gemma is already dead because he hasn't heard from her since the last phone call, and now their son is also involved. If the world is truly going to end, there is no point in Roy trying anymore. Therefore, Roy decides to just stand still and go through several loops without resistance. However, one morning, after experiencing multiple cycles of life and death, Roy suddenly realizes, why not spend time with Joe? This makes Roy get up, overcome a few challenges, and then meet Joe to have fun, play video games, and have lunch. He does this repeatedly, over and over, until the end of the world occurs. Once again, Roy really wanted to tell Joe that he was his father, but he never did. Roy was too afraid to do so. Then, on the 249th loop, Roy and Joe talked about how busy Gemma was, making it difficult for Joe to have long conversations with his mother, just like that morning. This statement shocked Roy because he had always thought that Gemma had been executed at night. Now, Roy prepares a new plan to see if it's possible to rescue her. Of course, this requires several loops to attempt sneaking into the dino facility until he finally succeeds in meeting Venter and Brett. He shoots them and demands an explanation. Brett admits that they were trying to figure out what Gemma had done with the Osiris spindle, as it seems she had sabotaged it, and now they couldn't control the chain reaction that had begun. At this moment, Venter suddenly realizes that Roy had used the spindle, which explains why he broke into the facility and reveals that Gemma had made Roy into what is called the missing mass. Roy quickly glances at the monitor displaying footage from the surveillance cameras to confirm the time of Gemma's death, which is approximately 14 minutes after Roy wakes up. After ending everything, which triggers the loop to start again, Roy decides to save Gemma, even though he only has 14 minutes to do so. As usual, Roy has to get rid of Mr. Goodmorning, but instead of avoiding the helicopter, he hijacks it to use as a vehicle to take him straight to the dino facility. Not wasting any time, Roy quickly grabs heavy weapons and uses them to eliminate all the assassins who were together and about to hunt him. Next, Roy gathers several weapons to confront each guard he encounters until he finally reaches the laboratory where Brett is about to execute Gemma. Without hesitation, Roy eliminates them before finally reuniting with his ex-wife. Roy lies, saying that he only has one more loop, but in reality, that's not the case. Gemma knows from the stories Roy tells about Joe, and Roy promises that their son is safe. Gemma then explains that the spindle cannot be stopped and will continue to loop. She also admits that the missing mass is specifically tailored to Roy's DNA, so if Roy enters the spindle, the day will repeat for the last time, and then everything will proceed normally. However, Gemma isn't 100% sure because this is the first time the machine has worked, and everything was done in a rush to stop Ventor. The film ends with Roy, full of determination, stepping into the spindle after saying goodbye to Gemma. Inside the machine, Roy recalls the things he needs to do to save Gemma and Joe while waiting for the day to repeat for the last time. Will Roy succeed in saving his family, or will the apocalypse still happen as a result of a human greed? And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.